It's the countdown to liftoff.
Liftoff of the dumpster fire.
Welcome to the AI disaster podcast. Actually, in seriousness, welcome to episode 348 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm awesome. I'm at the beach, so it's hard to be bad here, right?
That is true. That is true. I'm not at the beach, but I'm doing good. Thanks. I mean, you could have invited me, but that's fine. No, it's fine. It's fine. No, really.
Would you have come though? There you go. You go.
Maybe soon.
There you go. All right. So thank you everybody for joining today. Just a quick reminder that, before I do that, I want to extend a heartfelt thanks to our Patreon sponsors. Thank you very, very much for supporting the show. Love y'all. And just, if you would like to support our cause here, you can have the high honor, the privilege, dare I say, of getting our episodes a week before everybody else, which we think is pretty cool. So there you go.
You can be outraged before the rest of the world gets outraged at us.
That's right. You could hear all of the audio issues. You can, see all of the glitches. You could, whatever bad takes we have, you can hear them before everybody else. It's pretty awesome.
I think so. But in all seriousness, thank you to those who do support us. You keep our little humble show going, and we do appreciate it.
And now, a quick reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and not those of our employers. So there you go. All right. Jumping into some stories, we have first up from Security Week. Go ahead.
The title is OpenAI hit by TanStack supply chain attack.
Well, there you go. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I should have been a little more Johnny on the spot for you there, but
it's quite all right. So, anyway, as the title suggests, there was a pretty big spate, dare I say, of different open source packages compromised. Gosh, it seems like there's a new wave almost every day recently, but this was a wave that hit back on May 11th. And TanStack was one of the repositories that were hit by that. This was as part of the whole Shai Hulud. I don't know what number we're on. It's like 784, maybe, approximately. Anyway, two OpenAI developers were amongst the people who were impacted by this. And that resulted in some OpenAI, I think they call it credential material, being stolen. It's very, very interesting and benign sounding way of characterizing having your password stolen.
Well, they said it was their code signing certificates for iOS, macOS, Windows, and Android products. That's what they said was in the repo. Code signing certificates.
I mean, it's a good thing it wasn't anything important.
Right. I mean,
but fear not. None of their code was apparently impacted. Just the limited credential material, which included the signing certificates. But by the way, they I mean, to their credit, they did have apparently a process in place to revoke those signing certificates, and they're taking actions to try to prevent future signing of software using those certificates. So the thing that I guess struck me is this is becoming a huge problem. We talk about this sort of attack a lot. Obviously, OpenAI is a huge high-profile target. If malware ends up getting signed by them, that's going to be kind of a big deal. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is, I think what they likely had in place, which is probably something a lot of us need to have in place, which is a game plan in the event that you are hit by something like this, right? Because a lot of these attacks now are very focused on collecting as fast as they can, and then weaponizing as fast as they can all the credentials that are accessible from whatever system was compromised, whether it's a developer workstation or some kind of build runner or what have you. Being able to respond to that and knowing like all of the things that you're going to have to do as a response, because we have seen in the past some prior victims of these have done what they thought was enough in terms of rotating passwords and whatnot, only to find out that it wasn't enough, that there were some remaining issues, remaining persistence mechanisms that they hadn't closed out, and the attacker just continued to have fun. So I think that's the lesson that I wanted to convey with this story.
Yeah, it is interesting. We continue to see these open source package attacks through supply chains. And we've talked about this ad nauseum. And even today on the various social media platforms, seeing a bunch of new NPM stuff getting hit. And it just is, I don't know if this is selection bias. I don't know if it's confirmation bias, but these open source repos and third-party dependencies are just starting to become spreader sites for these attacks. And I still don't think we as an industry are dealing with it well. To echo your point, hey, what are you going to do when it's going to happen? Have a game plan. I would say it's easy to say, it's hard to do, but take it one step further and try to test and exercise that game plan before you're in a crisis. I know how easy it is to say and how difficult it is to find time to do it, especially in a non-disruptive way. But if you haven't done that, what I see typically happening is executives start making it up on the fly and just YOLOing their way through it. And nobody says, sorry, CXO, you're wrong, because they're the CXO. And so these things are going to likely happen to most software companies at some point. So ideally, you have a well-refined, well-thought-out, well-argued, well-written plan ahead of time that you've tested and tried and exercised, and then you don't have an egomaniac manager take over in the heat of the moment because he wants to be the rock star and doesn't trust the plan. But that's just my bitterness talking.
I think you're spot on. Look, we've talked about this in the past, perhaps in a slightly different context, about rotating API keys and things like that on some periodic basis, so that you have a level of comfort that you know how to do it, you know what the impacts are, all of that stuff. I would say that concept kind of extends to this. Now, obviously, rotating your signing keys and invalidating signing keys is probably not something most companies are going to do, unless they have to. But knowing how to do it, like in a tabletop test or some kind of a simulation, I think is an important thing, especially if you're a high profile target. Now, look, if not everybody's going to have the kind of environment where they have to worry about all of this stuff, but a lot of organizations do, and so it's something to be aware of.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's, in the heat of the moment, a lot more difficult to get it right if you haven't practiced ahead of time. So making it up as you go in the heat of an incident is definitely a lot more stressful than a poor plan well executed is often better than a perfect plan poorly executed, in my opinion. But as always, executives want to executize, and so they just do something. Honestly, I think that's one of the biggest challenges I've seen is when you have like a written plan and a written incident response plan, and the incident commander is not the most senior executive in the room, it just goes off the rails because they want to be in charge.
So, you know what? I want to talk about that for a second, because I think you're absolutely right. It's certainly something that I experienced when I was important way back when. And I've kind of come to accept that it's actually a deficiency of your incident response plan to not account for that.
So you're saying put shot collars in all the executives?
No, I'm saying like you need to hire somebody to like take the executives into a different room and like jingle keys in front of their face so they're kind of occupied a little bit, or I mean what one thing that I used to do when again when I was in Portland, when we would have security incidents, because look, everybody has security incidents, is we would have 2 or 3 meetings going on at the same time, and one of them was strictly for executives, and it was for so that they could all pontificate, they could get it out of their system, and then we had somebody, sometimes it was me, sometimes it was somebody on my team, being on that call and acting as kind of the translator to the other calls, which were more tactical executing, so that you didn't have, because I mean, look, the reality is, especially in a company of any significant size, you get some executives in there, and they're gonna drive the technical people responding to the incident absolutely bonkers with redirections and frustrating dead end paths that everybody knows isn't going to go anywhere, but like you have to do it anyway. So having a way to insulate the teams who are managing the incident, I think is pretty important. And so I think obviously you have to kind of tactfully integrate that into your plan, because your executives are going to read the plan. So it has to look like a value add for them. But
so designer shot collars
with diamonds made by Rolex
with AI.
It's you've cracked the code. You cracked the code.
So instead of dangling keys in front of them to distract them, tell them about the latest advances in AI.
Right. I can only, it's obviously been like almost 2 years since I've been out, but I can't imagine some of the discussions that have to be happening in the industry right now when an incident happens. Well, we should like have Claude run this incident. Like I've got to believe that kind of conversation is happening somewhere, and
absolutely,
it's kind of deflating, I suppose.
I think, if I'm trying to be charitable for just a moment, if you're looking at it from the executive's position, they're in theory accountable to the outcome, right?
Yes.
So they feel, and they're used to being the one making decisions and being in charge. I would just argue, if you've done your job well as an executive and you've empowered your team properly and you've taught them properly and you've come up with a good plan properly, trust that plan. If you feel the need to jump in and take over, that's a failure on you as a leader to set your team up to be successful.
Yeah. So look, I can tell you, well, it's a couple random thoughts on this, or maybe not so random. And number one is, most executives are there in that position, because the leadership above and around them has high confidence in their abilities. They've gotten to that level because, in right, wrong, or indifferent, like they've impressed somebody, and if they've been in that kind of position for a while, they've no doubt been surrounded by yes people who believe they're the smartest people ever. And so like you can't live in that world for very long without starting to believe that, like, your ideas are amazing. But on the other side, typically, unless you're the CEO, but even if you are the CEO, you got a board, right? You've got people above you demanding that you do something. And if it doesn't, if things aren't happening fast enough, it's not necessarily your team that's going to feel the heat, it's you. Now, I think your point is absolutely valid that, you hopefully, as an executive, have built a team that's going to do what needs to be done. But I can tell you, like, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of heat. You are accountable for for whatever is going on, and so there's a lot of pressure, to jump in and do something. And if you have that context that, like, you are the one who knows how to do this stuff better than anybody else, then I can kind of see how that probably happens. And by the way, I have this theory. I'm
Please.
not shy about this theory that executives are sociopaths, and so, like, that's part of it too.
Yeah, you're probably right. I just see that as a weakness in the methodology if they feel the need to do that, and a
Mm-hmm.
weakness in the system. But anyway,
Yeah. So moving on, which I think this next story is quite adjacent, or quite related to that. And this one's from the Hacker News, and the title is "Developer Workstations Are Now Part of the Software Supply Chain." I think this is probably a sponsored article, but to their credit, I don't think they do any selling in it. It's actually I thought, a really good treatment of the problem. I don't like that it's very clearly written by AI. It could probably have been half the length if it focused on not kind of repeating itself a bunch. But in general, I think does a pretty good job of laying out where we're at in the movies. It reminds me very much, by the way, of the realization that we had about IT, sysadmins, maybe about 20 years ago. Where, like, holy cow, these people are important, and their computers are pretty important, and perhaps we should be taking extra precautions on the computers that are used to administer the networks, because, like, they have permissions to everything and whatnot. So, we've adapted to that. We kind of evolved the privileged access workstation concept that nobody apparently uses. We, I think we've, broadly speaking, embraced some things like not using privileged IDs to check your email and browse the web and stuff like that. But the core similarities exist, right? We're now at a point where developer workstations are becoming kind of the concentration point for attackers to hit to carry out their objectives. It's just that their objectives are different now. Before, it was like figuring out how to move laterally, and taking advantage of credentials and the kind of the privileged position of an IT administrator's computer in an organization. This is now taking advantage of developers' workstation and their privileged position in the software supply chain of the thing they're building.
yeah, and I would say it's a little bit different approach to the compromise as well. It's
Mm-hmm.
now not coming at the OS directly, or the endpoint directly, or the person directly. It's coming via the tooling they're working with to build software. And
Right.
then, not only coming in through that tooling, but then leveraging the trust relationships, the automation relationships, the all the safe credentials, and leveraging that very widespread access to further the campaign back into the software ecosystem that they're attacking, and in a very, I would say, sophisticated manner that most security teams are probably not well attuned to monitor for.
Yes. Yes. Well, and not accidentally so. Like, for a long time, we've joked about this. It feels like for many years, about how we always turn off antivirus on developer workstations because it causes slow, causes slowness. Anytime a build fails, oh, it's because of all this security tooling on my computer. I can't tell you how many times I had developers come forward for exceptions, not wanting to, follow different rules, different technical controls and whatnot. And so this is where I think we certainly had this fight with IT people, because IT people had the same kind of prima donna complex. I will say that I think there's perhaps an element of truth to the developer position, maybe a little, maybe not a lot, but unlike an IT person who's kind of using like normal management console application kind of stuff, developers are, they're perhaps touching like thousands or tens of thousands or millions of files when an application is being built on their computer. And so it's, that's going to have a performance impact. And the more security solutions you layer on top of that, it's probably going to make it slower. So, I mean, I'm a little sympathetic to it, but on the other side, like, here we are. It's a problem.
Yeah. They were always the Wild West. The developers' machines were always, to your point, the last bastion of controls, because they had the need to do whatever they want to do anytime they want to do it. And they were successful in that argument. I think that might have to change based on these types of attacks. And that's going to cause a lot of angst and a lot of frustration. But how often do we see really powerful credentials and secrets being utilized on these desktops? And these, as part of the need to do their job, they have to have access to this stuff. Most, there's ways, but let's just, for the sake of argument, they need to be able to test anything they want, play with anything they want, do it. That comes with risk. And now we're seeing real world examples of why that risk is a problem. And this is exactly, to your point, the path we went down earlier with sysadmins. And I think that this is the beginning of the end of that freedom on developer machines. And it's not going to go out with a whimper. I can tell you that. There's going to be a lot of kicking and screaming and a lot of gnashing of teeth. But
I wondered about that too, because it's kind of an interesting time in history for software developers, isn't it?
That's true. AI wouldn't complain about this software being loaded on their machine.
That's right.
Or maybe it would. I don't know.
That's right. I don't mean that in a mean way. It's just, I don't think that developers have the same kind of leverage in the workplace that they once did. It's just not. I mean, I remember Steve Ballmer like hopping around on the stage saying, it's developers.
Yeah.
And now it's like companies can't get rid of them fast enough. So it's just an interesting turn of tide. I think things will kind of normalize on that front, but that's not really the point of this. The big issue, I mean, just to remove any mystery for anybody who's listening, the issue is that developers, especially in everybody, even like commercial software, packaged software, has a heavy reliance on open source components. And so developers are, they're creating they're creating code environments that include components from all over God's green earth, right? They're open source. There's proprietary stuff they've written. There's probably stuff that they've licensed from other companies, on and on and on, that are in code repos. And, they will typically clone those repositories to their computer, the local computer. And whether it happens up in their code repo or on their local computer, as they're going through the build process, the tooling is downloading the latest versions of the packages, especially the open source packages, which sometimes have been compromised or perhaps spoofed. Like they've been, the developer's been tricked into thinking they're downloading A, but it's actually B. It just happens to look like A. And that package is either itself natively compromised or it has some metadata that causes the build process to execute some malicious commands, because the whole thing is trusted all the way through. And we've for a long time we've been getting developers to not store keys and whatnot in the actual build pipelines and up in the cloud, so to speak, and keep it on their computers. Well, they've been listening, and so now their computers are full of SSH keys and cloud API keys and all of these things that these malware strains are now searching for pretty effectively, to the point where we have this Shai-Hulud worm, which, by the way, has recently been open sourced, and I think is part of the contributing factor to like the explosion of compromised packages that we've been seeing over the past week or so.
Mm-hmm.
But those that malware is like it's designed to get on your system, look at what packages you are an administrator for, what keys you have, and then replicate itself so that anything that you are an administrator for or have contributor privileges to, it goes and it creates an infected copy of that. So it just spreads like a worm throughout GitHub and NPM and PyPy and all the different code repos. And
yeah,
it's insane.
Well, we've said it before. I think at some point these code repositories are going to have to do something. Even though it's not, I mean, they can always point to, hey, you're not doing your security properly. You're not using the tools we're giving you properly. This is a mistake by the end user. I still think the concentration of risk on these repos is going to force them at some point to do something.
I think so. I was thinking about this a little bit with with shiny hunters and Salesforce. And I know that's we won't go deep into it, but Salesforce, they took a hard line. They're like, you know what? We weren't compromised. It wasn't us. It was all y'all. Y'all like had bad hygiene and you got compromised. It's unfortunate, and to their credit, they've made some changes, but I wouldn't say they've accepted responsibility. I think part of it is because they're kind of like a natural monopoly, right? It's not.
But they have forced their third-party users and third-party applications to level up their security. They've changed their requirements to be a lot more stringent.
That's fair. You're right. So maybe I was
to it.
Maybe I was being a little too cynical there.
I think ultimately I think they're reacting the way I'm anticipating these repos are going to react at some point, which is we've given so many freedom and controls and opportunities and ways of doing things that are now being abused. We've got to pull back and limit or force some more friction to protect you from the bad guys. And we'll see. I think you started to hint at something about a monopoly. I think one of the interesting problems here is that friction could cause them, if only one does it. Let's just say, GitHub, just as an example. I don't know. I'm just picking on something. Or NPM says, all right, here's all these new security controls that are a pain in the ass to stop these sorts of attacks. And none of their competitors do it. What if they start losing a bunch of business? Because their users don't want to deal with the friction for their own good, kind of thing. So there's that sort of potential blowback if they start to implement a decent number of potential fixes to this sort of the power that allows these attacks to happen.
Yeah, I think that GitHub, in my mind, is somewhat similar to Salesforce in that like there aren't a lot of meaningful competitors. Like if you can't just say, you know what, I'm packing up from GitHub and I'm moving to whatever. I mean, there like you do have GitLab and some others, but they're not GitHub. So
So what you're
that
saying
doesn't
is that there needs to be a Fediverse version of GitHub that you're going to run?
no, absolutely not.
You heard it here first.
Absolutely not. That sounds like a terrible idea.
Most of my ideas are.
Yeah. Anyway, but I think you're right. Like even I infer, by the way, that one of the reasons Salesforce did it was that they probably were. I mean, obviously it was a brand issue, but I have to believe that there was simply like a labor savings component. Like I can't imagine how much time they were spending responding to questions and complaints and inquiries and this and that. And they're, I mean, some executive at some points like, we got to stop the madness. Like this is insane. And maybe the same will happen at GitHub. I don't know.
Indeed.
All right. So moving on to our next story. This one also comes from the Hacker News. And the title here is Ivanti, Fortinet, SAP, VMware, N8N, all patch RCE SQL injection and privilege escalation flaws. And so look, the reason I brought this story in wasn't about this. I mean, we can all laugh at Ivanti and Fortinet. Like, haha, it's not a hard thing to laugh at, right? But what I really wanted to talk about was kind of the bigger picture. We have been for the past 3 weeks or maybe more consternating as an industry over the impact of Mythos. What are we going to do when the impact of Mythos fully hits, and we're going to have all of these 0 days and our patching cadence is going to go through the roof, and what are you doing to get prepared for Mythos? And meanwhile, I feel like the temperature under our pot has been turned way up, and I'm not even sure that it's the result of Mythos. Like, I have a feeling that there's just a lot more focus on this now. Maybe some of it is people are starting to realize, hey, maybe I could use some of the AI tools that are already out there to find vulnerabilities. Maybe that's what's going on. I don't know. But this is just a small subset, by the way, of what I've been seeing. Like there's been, I don't know, 3 or 4 Linux 0 days. Now, fortunately, I think they've all been, either contained or local privilege escalation. I'm not that they aren't serious, but there's been a bunch in succession, and there's been a number of Windows 0 days over the past, couple weeks. And it's just this, like, it feels like the intensity is increasing. In the meantime, we're all still consternating. Oh, well, what's going to happen when Mythos comes? And I'm sitting here thinking, like, are we already starting to see, again, not necessarily the impact of Mythos proper, but like the impact that we're consternating over? Is it already starting to happen?
It could well be. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe, right? Maybe this painful cycle we're going through right now of all these patches coming out, if we can adapt to them quickly, might actually be moving the needle a little bit closer to less vulnerable code in the world. If these AI tools are truly helping find these problems in ways that humans can't, and I think the jury is out on that, because I've seen some compelling arguments on both sides of that argument. I don't know what to believe yet. But if vendors are starting to adopt these more effective tools to protect their own code bases and protect their customers, or third-party bug bounty or whatever it is that's finding this, isn't that a net positive if we can get things patched before the bad guys exploit them? Big if there, right? maybe that's a good thing. And I guess that comes with the assumption that there's a finite amount of these critical bugs that are left to be discovered. Of course, we're generating new code all the time, and that might be a dangerous assumption, by the way. But the vulnerability exists whether or not we have a patch for it or not, in theory. So knowing about the vulnerability, I always feel is better than not knowing about the vulnerability. I guess the catch is, can we patch fast enough to not have a huge exploit apocalypse upon us?
Yeah, and I think there's two layers to that too. And I don't know that the second layer is really in play yet, but obviously there's a speed to applying patches, and we all know that, like, we've struggled with that for decades. This is not a new problem. It's not a unique problem. It's just kind of like background radiation. It's always there. Sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's better, but it's always there. I think the other issue that I see is the ability for manufacturers or maintainers, I should say, to create patches at speed. Like we made reference last time to I don't have the graph handy, but it was Mozilla. They were one of the people who used Mythos, and they pointed at their code base. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but like every release they were patching somewhere around 20 vulnerabilities. And then with the release that came after their use of Mythos, it was something like close to 300. It was 10 times as many, roughly speaking, as I recall. And obviously they were able to handle that. But what happens to smaller teams? What happens to open source, individual maintainers who are suddenly getting hit? Linus Torvalds was online complaining a couple of days ago about all of the bugs reports that are security reports that are coming into the Linux kernel mailing list. And I think that part of that was, it sounds like a lot of them were just like reporting the same bug. Like everybody was using AI to find the same bug and report the same bug like over and over and over again. But I mean, that's itself is a problem. It's a flavor of the problem that that the curl team had reported, a couple months ago, where they stopped accepting AI generated bug reports. But I mean, at some point, it feels like, and maybe this is like a curve that we have to get over, and once we're on the other side of it, it
Right.
goes down. But like for a period of time, I'm guessing some maintainers are going to struggle, and that means we're probably going to have unpatched vulnerabilities sitting out there.
That is the interesting question. Is this the new normal or is this a weird spike? I don't know. Or do these tools become commoditized, pushed into the development lifecycle, and we ship code with less vulnerabilities to begin with? That would be the ideal outcome in some ways, but I feel that's more marketing hype than reality right
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what timeline you're talking about. I mean, I think at some point,
between
yeah,
now and the heat death of the universe.
it's, I think at some point, it'll become more commonplace. But I think I kind of go back to, like, there's a big disparity in different kinds of development environments. You have the Microsofts and the OpenAIs and the Anthropics who, I envision having like the best of everything. Maybe that's not true, right? But and then you've got individual people maintaining open source packages. I'm guessing those people aren't going to have an AI enabled code analyzer anytime soon. Maybe, I don't know, but it just seems like for a very long time we're going to have big open swaths of issues, and that, by the way, presupposes that that it would actually work. Um, I think it will work to some extent. I mean, there's no, like, you can't. I know there's a lot of AI detractors, but like, you can't deny that apparently Mythos found 10 times more bugs than in Firefox than is normally found, right? Like, it's just it's just there. So it's going to find some things if it's able to be integrated into your pipeline. Can it find everything? Probably not. But is that the goal? I don't not sure that it is.
Well, the question is, how expensive is that going to be? Let's assume it works great. Let's say it's grabs 80% of vulnerabilities before they ship. How expensive is that? How many people can afford to invest in it?
That's the question, right? I don't think any of us know. So anyway, I guess my point for bringing this story is that I think the discussions about this being a future problem are perhaps a little naive, and maybe the problem is already somewhat here, and we need to be we need to be paying attention and tightening up our processes now, because, by the way, a lot of these are actually manifesting as 0 days. Either like they were found by a security researcher who decided to just throw caution to the wind and release proof of concept code before a patch is available, or it's being discovered by some adversary, and the first we learn about it is in active attacks. But we're seeing a lot. It feels like, at least based on my reading of the news. Again, it could be the shark attack in summer thing. Like, I don't know, but it feels like we're seeing a big uptick in this, and so I think it pays to to start putting some more focus on this, treating it less as a forward-looking problem and more as a present problem.
Fair enough.
All right, and
Mr.
then
Doomer and Gloomer.
Well, I'm not trying to be doomer and gloomer. I'm trying to get people to, like,
You're not trying. You're succeeding.
thinking that they need to change how their patching process works.
Yeah, that's fair. And one quick thing on that is, we say that, and it's easy to say that, but it usually comes down to prioritization and resources and people assigned to such tasks and methodologies. Like, it's usually not easy to do. So start working on it sooner rather than later, I guess, is what I'm saying. It's real easy for an executive to say, tighten up your patch process. And then you go to talk to people who do the patch, and you're like, yeah, that's cool. I got 1,000 other priorities. What do you want me to drop?
You should rub some AI on it.
Brilliant. That is thought leadership right there.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's there. AI is there. It's there. You should look, OpenClaw can apply patches. What more do you need?
I mean, they're not the right patches, but it sure as hell can apply them.
At what point are we worried about applying the right patches?
Fair. You know what? Iteration. It's a step in the right direction, right?
Correct. Let's not make perfect our goal.
Your insights are amazing and clearly without estimation of worth.
So you're saying they're priceless?
In one theory of that word, yes.
We'll leave it there. I'm going to take it.
They lack a price.
I'm going to take the win. All right, our last story comes from the Register, and the title here is "Nobody Believes the Criminals and Scumbags Who Hacked Canvas Really Deleted Stolen Student Data." This is a follow-up to a story we talked about last time, where in the Instructure offering called Canvas had been hacked by shiny hunters. Their data was stolen, and then they were hacked again and had their login portals defaced. So the big news last week was that this Instructure company apparently settled with shiny hunters. unclear. It's not been stated that there was an exchange of money, but it's heavily implied. And so the point of this article is, while in structure in the aftermath of whatever settlement they made has come out and said, the adversary here has provided us evidence that they've deleted the data. There's a bunch of pretty smart people who are quoted in here. Amongst them, by the way, good friend of the show, Alan Liska.
Shout out to Alan.
Shout out to Alan, who is quoted in the title. He's the one who said, "Do I believe they deleted the data? No, they're criminals and scumbags." Quote from Alan Liska, the one and only.
And he wasn't talking about us this time.
That's true. I have a feeling we're going to get an email, though. Hi, Alan. We love you.
Please don't sue us again.
So, anyway, the company, again, they said that they received evidence that the data was shredded, I think is what they said. And lots of experts, industry experts, quoted throughout this article saying that it's like there's almost no chance that happened, and you should not take solace in in this data not being sold or whatnot. And somewhere down in the article there's a quote about this is likely going to be used in a different context. It'll probably be used, the data will be used to perpetrate phishing attacks or social engineering attacks to try to do kind of more one at a time types of scams. And it might not be Shiny Hunters that does that, right? It might be somebody else that stole it. And by the way, Shiny Hunters may think that they did delete it, but like when you're a band of criminals, sometimes not everybody is acting in the way that you expect them to. It occurred to me, though, that if you are I almost said infrastructure, if you're in structure or some of the other companies that have paid the ransom, is your objective really to not have that data weaponized against the end people who the data is about? Or is it really about not having your customers, the school districts in this case, become the victims of the direct victims of their own extortion campaigns? Like, is that the thing that they're actually getting as a result of paying the ransom?
Possibly. I mean, it could be a little column A, a little column B.
Because I have to believe, like, if you're sitting there and that because a lot of these companies, like, there's an intermediary, like you're a service provider and you provide services to other companies or school districts or whatever, and then the data that ends up getting stolen is like somewhere down the line. It relates to individuals, somewhere down in the food chain. But as a service provider, your customers are who you have a contract with. Your customers are the ones you don't want to have pissed off at you, right? And if obviously in the wake of a breach, like, it's not great. Tensions are high. People are unhappy, but they're made much more unhappy if your customers are themselves being extorted as a result of something you did.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it becomes a much bigger PR nightmare at that point, especially when you look at some of these extortion attempts are really ugly, including swatting and threats of physical violence, intimidation. Right. Like, can get really ugly.
Yes.
So
yeah, they talk a bit about that. I didn't realize some of the tactics, and I don't know, like, if for example, I don't know if Shiny Hunters is among the people who are making threats of violence, but apparently that is a common thing where like they make a reference to data stolen about cancer patients, and they threaten to they're posting nude pictures of the cancer patients from the doctor's office, right? And then they're also threatening to SWAT them if they don't pay. Like, that's pretty freaking awful. I mean, like, it's hard to imagine something kind of more awful than that. So I mean, these are sometimes pretty awful tactics, for sure.
But whether or not, and they talk about this in the article, whether or not they truly delete the data, there is this incentive for well-known organizations like Shiny Hunters to not abuse that trust later because they're less likely to get paid the next time. Mm-hmm. They have this incentive to at least appear honorable, or at least not blatantly, obviously turn around and do something else with it. In fact, we saw stories in the past where somebody paid and then an affiliate followed up and tried to extort, a follow-up extortion after it wasn't supposed to happen. And that victim reached back out to Shiny Hunters and went, "Oh yeah, our bad, sorry," and undid and deleted the follow-up extortion attempt. So there is this weird perverse incentive. That's probably not the right word. This incentive for these groups to try to follow their own rules, but they would be stupid to actually delete it. And then there's the likelihood, in fact, it's talked about in this article, that data sometimes sneaks out in other ways, or as long as it isn't easily attributable to Shiny Hunters. Like I said, it didn't come from our breach, wasn't us. I think they can maintain their air of honor in these agreements and continue to further this campaign. But if everyone knew, no, they're just going to leak it anyway, then nobody would pay. There's no upside.
Yeah. So that means that they're probably monetizing it on both ends, right? They're getting.
I'm not going to say what I want to say, but I'm saying it.
Getting the ransom payment. It's okay. We all know. We all have an imagination, and we know it's okay. Anyway, they're getting paid the ransom, and then they're turning around and somehow monetizing the sale of the data to on underground markets, perhaps parceling it out or what have you, so it can't be easily attributed. And by the way, like, that might not be an official thing. Again, it's a bunch of criminals, and some of them may be like freelancing at night. Who knows? So it's an interesting game theory exercise, right? Like, if, again, as you point out, if they aren't perceived as trustworthy by their victims, there's no incentive to pay. But on the other hand, if you do pay, you're basically funding future operations, and so it's a definite damned if you do, damned if you don't situation.
Yeah, and we don't have enough time on today's show to unpack that entire debate again. I personally think it's never that black and white. I think there's a lot of compelling arguments on both sides of that. And I hate to be wishy-washy. I just say, until you're in the middle of it with your particular set of circumstances and your particular set of pressures, it's tough to know. I certainly am not in any way agreeing with a group that says, or I don't like the idea of supporting criminals by paying them in any sense. But there are some folks who advocate for legal bans to ever paying ransomware. I don't agree with that. And there are times when it may be in the best interest of you and your customers to pay. Now, that sucks. I wish that wouldn't happen. But I think that that's an individual decision an individual company should be allowed to make.
Yeah. Yep. Makes sense. Alrighty. That is the show for today. Thank you all for listening. If you want to find links to the stores we talked about, go to our website. It's defensivesecurity.org and look for episode 348. Also, a quick reminder that we have the best YouTube podcast in this galaxy. We're still working on other galaxies. It's at Defensive Podcast. If you go to YouTube, you'll find all of our episodes going back like hundreds now. So please, by the way, please go watch them. We need watch hours. So that the rest of the world catches up with things. Also, a quick reminder that you can support the show by donating to our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/defensivesec. And so where can people connect with you?
You can find me on X and infosec.exchange, which, by the way, is your phenomenal Mastodon server, with the same handle, at Lerg, Lerg.
Awesome. And I am at Jerry at infosec.exchange. I occasionally hang out on LinkedIn, but I try not to. And with that, we have reached the end. So yeah, there you go. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great week.
Thank you. Indeed. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you later.